Hello people and welcome back to another video. At last I've managed to get back to my Mac after a long period of DIY and the house being in complete chaos. I've not been able to sort of get to my computer. So now I'm at my computer looking at all the research, all the little windows I had open and all the literature I was looking at before, and it excites me again when I get back on it, when I read it. It gets the juices flowing again. And I'm here, guys, to help if you're when it comes to the history anyway, the Scottish history, because I was victim of all the Braveheart and Outlaw King stuff, and all the Bruces, the true king, and all this stuff. And I know it's all gone now, but we've got to realise that the way the world is today and the way Scots are living, the same people are still owning the land. The same people still rule this world. It's a giant ring of feudalism and nepotism, and it's kind of invisible. But when you start digging into history and picking away the lies, you can see that these people weren't for the best interests of the common people. These Bruces, Stewarts, Douglases, and this is what we're looking at today. Looking at the Douglas archives, as they call it. I'm kind of trying to speak quiet because it's night time, but so excuse my soft tone. But yep, I'm back at the literature and the way the world is right now, and especially after the anniversary, 20th anniversary, 9/11, and this whole pandemic that's happening. It's easy to sort of get lost and wonder who's behind all this, what's going on, and it's easy to follow the money and the bloodlines and the families and the land. It's in your face. They just muddy the water with the media and the alternative media. Get people talking about Illuminatis, the Jays, all kinds of people to blame, but the people are staring you right in the face, a lot of them. They're your politicians, your presidents, your kings, your queens that are still kicking about today. Everyone thinks this queen that we've got in Britain is just some harmless old lady. And she's the head of state, she's the head of army. She's not some harmless old lady, and people need to remember that this is the way they want to be portrayed. Because if they aren't portrayed as that, we'll soon get rid of them. Yeah. They want to be fragile old granny in the background when they're not really. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. But like I said, I'm back in my literature, and I forgot how good these articles were that I found. And this is a Douglas one, and as you can see here, guys, they've got the rulers of Scotland, and right away, it's Robert the First, Robert the Bruce. So on the Douglas page, we've got Robert the Bruce already, and that's what I've realised, that the Bruces, the Douglases, the Stewarts, even Wallace, I think, was related to the Bruce to some degree, and it's all a giant family and nepotism, and they weren't Scots. They were family foreigners that came over and pretended to be Scots. And really, the common Scot, the common man, got pushed away. They got killed. It's like, and we celebrate these people. We do, and it's they were fighting for Scotland. They were fighting for Scotland. They were fighting for their land. They weren't fighting for the Scottish people. And today, a tiny amount, it's something like 600 people own 50% of Scottish land private. That's ridiculous. 50% of Scottish land is owned by 600 people. That's ridiculous. And into the one of the biggest landowners is a guy called Anders Paulsen, a Danish guy, and he owns a clothing line. What's it called? Is it Joe? I can't remember the clothing line, but he owns a clothing line, and he owns a lot of land in Scotland. And the second is Buchanan, Lord Buchanan, or he's a sir or something like that. But he's related to the Stuarts through Charles, a illegitimate child of Charles, this landowner. So at the end of the day, we're still ruled by these false lineages, these fake imposter kings and queens and rulers that supposedly saved us from the English. And this goes for the English too. If you're English or Welsh or Irish, this goes for you too. This happened to you as well. I'm just focusing on the Scottish part because we have a lot of it rammed in our throat to keep us happy. To keep us happy, all this Braveheart stuff. When really, they still own most of the land out there. How free are we? How free are we? Got the cheek taken, wave these flags, and Scotland this, Scotland the brave, and freedom, and all this rubbish that epitomises Scotland. When, like I said, 600 people own 50% of the land. And something like 11% of the land in Scotland is owned by the people. The other, like 89% or whatever it is owned by private landowners. It's ridiculous. And it goes way back to these bloodlines. And these bloodlines are ruling the world today. These bloodlines are your presidents, your mayors, it goes right down even to celebrities, certain actors and singers, and they've all got connections somewhere. If you've got a connection to these bloodlines, they'll put you in a position somewhere. Even if you can't sing, they'll make you a singer. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm going on a bit of a rant here. But my point is that we've got fanboys and people with their fake, it's like patriot, they're fake patriots. They're what's fueling their patriotism is a lot of bull crap. And I'll quickly show you guys. I'm going to go in more depth in later videos, but I'll just skim over some of the stuff I was looking at. And this is the Douglas Archives, a collection of historical and genealogical records. So guys, it's douglashistory.co.uk if you want to check it out. I'm using this for fair use critically, but they have here under the rulers of Scotland pictures of the Bruces, these ridiculous pictures, and the House of Alpin. So guys, in mainstream terms and Scottish history terms, the first King of Scots was Kenneth MacAlpin. Apparently he united the Picts and the Scots together to make Scotland. So before that there wasn't a Scotland, there was Pictland and there was a Dalriada. Kenneth was one of the came from the Dalriada, who was an Irish. They were Irish. The Picts were more Brythonic. But that's been kind of acknowledged by historians, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest this. And this started the year 843. But look here, guys. Before the first King of Scotland, Kenneth, who do we have here? Douglas. In the line of Scottish Kings. Let me have a click on that. Fact, wait there. We'll go back there because I think there's a little paragraph beside it. So the 67th King, Buchanan, and I think Buchanan was one of the... I'll have a look here actually. Duke of Buccleuch. Danish clothing billionaires Anders Holch Paulsen and wife Anne and the Duke of Buccleuch each own more than 200,000 hectares, spread across multiple properties. Anyway. Right, so the 67th King, Buchanan. Buchanan's the author that claimed this, by the way. This was the author, Buchanan. Sorry. So Buchanan claimed this in Rerum Scotorum Historia. I think this was written in 1500s or something. But Salvathius, doesn't sound Celtic or Gaelic or British to me. Salvathius, in LX is 60 and 1V is 4. So the 64th king himself, the son of Eugenius the 8th, was succeeded by Achaeus, the 65th king. Achaeus was the son of Etphinus and was succeeded by Congalus the 3rd. The 66th king, Congalus, his cousin German, reigned 5 years and was succeeded by Douglas, or Douglas, the 67th king. So this is what Buchanan claims. And this is what I've been reading with Caledonia, and I'm going to bring up another brilliant essay by Innes, which kind of debunks these guys, Buchanan and Fordin and these other people that kind of backed up the Stuarts with false history, and the false history is still being it's still being used today to prop up these royals. In Holyrood Palace, they have the portraits of these fake kings hanging up in Holyrood Palace, which is the official residence of the royal family in Edinburgh, in Scotland. So these people know it's a lie. They must know it's a lie. They're fake pictures. Anyway, have a look at Douglas. Even the portrait here, this is fake, guys. Douglas, Sive Douglas. So this was apparently a Scottish king, Douglas. It was a Douglas. It's ridiculous, guys, but anyway, just like the Stuarts and the Bruces, the Douglases need to wriggle their way into the royal line and claim some land in Scotland, some power. Anyway, I'll read this part. Douglas, King of Scotland, 833 to 838, the 67th king. This is by Buchanan, Rerum Scotarum Historia. Douglas, the 67th king, Douglas, the son of Silvathius, was next king to Congallas III, the 66th king. The soldiers, not able to endure the severity of his government, gathered themselves together to Alpinus, the son of Achaeus, and because they could not persuade him by fair means to undertake the kingdom, they compelled him by force and menaces to be seemingly on their side. He, having gathered together an army and pretended to do as he would have him, disappointed them and fled to Douglas. His coming was acceptable to the king, but a great dismay to the rebels, and therefore they accuse him to the king, as if Alpinus himself had persuaded them to rebel. The king, well perceiving their calumny, suddenly prepared his army, and so prevented the rumour of his coming. Those of them which he took he put to death. In the meantime Hungus died, and his eldest son Dorstologus was slain by the fraud of his brother Eganus. Neither did the murderer long survive his brother, so that the male stock of Hungus being extinct, his sister's son Alpinus, as next heir, both by an ancient law and in right of blood, claimed the kingdom. The Picts disdained him as a foreigner, whereupon Douglas sent messengers to them to expostulate the matter, but they refused to give them the audience, but commanded them to depart in 4 days. Douglas intended to make war upon them with all his might, but in the preparation thereof, as he was passing over the Spey, whose current was very violent, the vessel in which he was sunk, he was drowned, after he had reigned 6 years, some say 7. It is likely that he was buried in Colmkill. So, that's the story of Douglas, King of Scotland. So the portrait, the monarch is depicted within a painted oval, head and shoulders facing the viewer, wearing armour and a maroon cap with a white feather. The portrait is one of 93 bust lengths commissioned to decorate the Great Gallery at Holyrood House, Edinburgh. It is painted by Jacob de Witt II, a Dutch artist working in Scotland from 1673. Together with 18 full-length, these portraits illustrate the genealogy of the Royal House of Scotland from Fergus I, who ascended the throne 330 BC, to James the VII, abdicated in 1689. De Witt's iconographic scheme was based on well-known chronicles of Scottish history by the Renaissance humanist Hector Boece. This is another guy who we debunk in these other pieces of literature. Scotorum Historiae and George Buchanan, Rerum Scotorum. The inscriptions on the paintings correspond with Buchanan's list of Scottish kings. From the left to the right, these are the number of the names of the kings, followed by the date of ascension. The dates, however, are considerably muddled by a later restorer or perhaps even the artist himself. Both real and legendary, their purpose was to proclaim the authority of the Stuarts as divinely appointed rulers of Scotland. And you've got to remember here, they said the first king was Fergus I, who ascended from the throne in 330 BC. BC. When we know that this Kenneth came in well after that, probably around 500, 600, 800, whatever it was. It was nowhere near 330 BC. The Scottish kings ruled. But this is the Stuarts making stuff up. Along with the Bruces and Douglases and even the Wallaces. I think the Wallaces might even come into it as well. Both real and legendary, their purpose was to proclaim the authority of the Stuarts divinely appointed rulers of Scotland. Commissioned and paid for by the Scottish Privy Council, the series was intended to convey the power and greatness of the country's governing body as much as that of their king. With no authentic likeness on which to base his portraits of medieval kings, De Wet made extensive use of an earlier set by the Scottish artist George Jameson, of which 26 survive in private collections. From this limited basis, the resulting series appears rather repetitious, meaning they all look the same, because they're just made up portraits that line the Holyrood Palace to bolster this fake lineage, to convince the people of Scotland that they are divine. And you got to remember, divine right means you're not just a snob that won some battles and you think you should rule the land. You're telling the people you're chosen from God. Divine right. You have been picked by God to rule the people. So they have to make up this bullshit propaganda. Much more important than their aesthetic merit, therefore, was the symbolic power of painting an extremely long royal lineage stretching more than 2 millennia. Buchanan Rerum Scotarum Historiam, translation from 1751, a valiant and good prince. He was drowned coming over the River Spey to war against the Picts. Number 67 in the series, inscribed Dungalis, save Dungalis. So there's a couple of notes here. The Scotti family of Italy claims a lineage from Douglas, King of Scotland. Salvathius, the 64th king himself, the son of Eugenius VIII, was succeeded by Achius, the 65th king. Shakespeare describes King Duncan's interment as being at Comkill, the sacred storehouse of his priesthood. Anyway, guys, Douglas, same again. We can look at the... Where was it? There's actually a family tree. You can see them all, how they all integrate with each other. But we can have a look at these legendary kings as well. I'll try and find the family tree before I go. Let's see. Maybe it was back one. It's down here. So here it is, guys. This is where the Douglases weasel their way in. Already up here in the 1300s, the Bruces have now weaseled their way in. See Robert II at the top here, with Elizabeth Moore. She dies. She was a Scot. She was connected to Scottish royalty. He snuck in there, married her. She mysteriously died, and he marries Euphemia de Ross, and they have all these kids. And they're Stuarts, and as you can see, Stuarts. And there's a Douglas. So William Douglas marries Egidia. Egidia, that was one of their kids. And this is, you can see here the blue squares, guys. This is the Douglases within the Stuarts, the Bruces, and James, Henry Stuart, Mary, all the Stuarts. So there you go, guys. The Douglases is just another imposter, fake royal Flemish descent, if I've not mentioned before. And we've got the legendary kings of Scotland. And this is what Wikipedia says about them. The Scottish Renaissance humanist George Buchanan gave a long list of Scottish kings in his History of Scotland, published in Latin as Rerum Scotorum Historia in 1582. most of whom are now considered by historians to be figures of legend or completely misrepresented. The list went back around 1900 years from his time and began with Fergus I, James VI of Scotland, who was Buchanan's pupil, adopted the story of Fergus I as his ancestor, and the antiquity of the line was emphasised by the House of Stuart. So there you go. Buchanan was his teacher. So there's Dornadilla, fourth legendary king according to George Buchanan, painted by Jacobs de Wet the Younger, in the commission from Charles II in Holyrood Palace, with these fake pictures hanging up of fake kings in the Holyrood Palace. So the dynastic importance. The genealogy of Scottish kings going back to Fergus MacFercar, i.e. Fergus I and beyond, was in place by the middle of the 13th century when it was recited at the 1249 inauguration of Alexander III of Scotland. In 1301, Baldred Bissett was involved in a hearing at the papal curia on the Scottish side of the debate on Edward I of England's claims, and at least helped prepare material dealing with the mythological history that was being adduced as relevant on both sides. The question of the antiquity of the Scottish royal lineage, and even the details of the associated origin myth, became particularly significant from 1542 when Mary, Queen of Scots, came to the Scottish throne. Buchanan alluded to Mary's long ancestry in his epithalamium written for her 1559 marriage to Francis II of France. In the period before Mary's betrothal, a marriage to Prince Edward, the future Edward VI of England, was much discussed. As part of that debate, the list of legendary kings of Britain became involved, in the form of the Brutus myth, promoted by Edward Hall over the doubts of Polydore Virgil. Publicists on the English side of the argument, including John Elder, James Henryson, and William Lamb, had cast doubt on the Scottish history. When James VI entered Edinburgh in 1579, the pageantry included a public posting of the genealogy of the Scottish kings, and when his son Charles I visited in 1633, portraits of 107 kings were displayed, some of which, by George Jameson, survive. Another series of 110 imagined portraits of the monarchs from the list was painted for Charles II by Jacob de Wet and hung in Holyrood Palace. The de Wet portrait collection later became a noted site for tourists. For example, it was written about by John Mackay, a journal through Scotland. So, we're now going to look at the historiography of Buchanan's list, and this means how much evidence supports this list that he's created. Well, Rerum Scotiarum Historia was published only in the year of Buchanan's death. He had worked on it during much of his life. It was published with the De Jure Regni Apud Scotos, first printed 1579. Of the two works, the Historia for Buchanan served as a source of precedents on dealing with bad kings. Tyrants in the list inevitably come to a sorry end at the hands of the people, in line with Buchanan's monochromatic position. While the De Jure is cast as a humanist dialogue between Buchanan himself and Thomas Maitland, and concentrates on classical exemplars, both works were dedicated to James VI. King James came to regard the chronicles of Buchanan and John Knox as infamous invectives. The king list of the Historia was therefore in that work only incidental to Buchanan's purpose in the book, whatever later uses it may have been put to. After the later scholarly work of Thomas Innes, which guys, I've got his, this is it here, I'm going to be reading that as well. I have already read some of it. Thomas Innes, the list was given little credence in its initial parts. It was, however, the culmination of centuries of development of king lists for the Kingdom of Scotland. Much fictional material had been introduced into these lists by the humanist Hector Boss, writing half a century before Buchanan. Peter Hume Brown, in his biography of Buchanan, describes him as somewhat more sceptical than Boss, in what he accepted as historical, but less so than John Mayer, writing earlier. Buchanan has been called inconsistent in his treatment of classical sources, since his rejection of the legend of Gathelus does not extend to the early Scottish kings, who are equally unsupported by classical authors. Writers who perpetuated the Bose tradition, as put into form by Buchanan, included John Johnston, Inscriptions Historia Regum Scotorum, Gilbert Gray, David Hume of Godscroft, James Usher, Alexander Garden, and James Wallace. Funny there's a Wallace there. The antiquity of the line was attacked by William Lloyd, who urged that Scotland was not settled before the 6th century. George Mackenzie published the 1685 defence of the antiquity of the royal line of Scotland against Lloyd, and a sequel the next year against Edward Stillingfleet, who had given a sceptical account of Bose's history in Chapter 5 of his Origins Britannicae. The work of Innes, which in effect terminated the scholarly debate, was published in 1729, but the tradition continued, and it continues today, because we've got it in our modern culture and media. James Anderson, Royal Genealogies. His book was based on a work of Johann Hubner, but with Anderson's additions. The King List is table 499, attributed to Bose and Buchanan. See, you'll hear these names, Bose and Buchanan and Ford. These are the guys that were trying to prop up the Stuarts. Francis Nichols, The British Compendium, William Guthrie. Subsequently, John Pickerton and William Forbes Skene contributed to the study of the King List. Reference works continued. However, to copy Buchanan's list and the mythological history took many years to drop out of circulation, persistent in print as factual well into the 19th century. So all this crap was still continued, even with Innes's essay debunking it, and with like this Caledonia I began reading, it debunks a lot of this crap. Persistent in print as factual well into the 19th century. For example, the 4th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, 1810, Encyclopaedia Perthensis, the London Encyclopedia, and the individual kings and reference books by George Crabbe and John Platts. Legendary content. See List of Scottish monarchs for the view of contemporary historians of Scotland. The first historical figure in Buchanan's list is Caraticus. The rediscovery of the works of Tacitus prompted Bose to include this well-attested figure from the period of the Roman occupation of Britain. So I don't know how you can have Caraticus as a king of Scotland. And the last legendary figure is more complex to discuss. The kings in the list from about the 6th century in the 5th book of Buchanan onwards may have some relationship to historical figures in the kingdom of Dalriada. So the later his list is, the more closer to the truth he's getting. The further back you go, the more it's made up and just crap. But the kingdom of Scotland, i.e. Alba, was not a historical reality until Kenneth MacAlpin created it in the year 843, and what was said about his predecessors in the list by Buchanan may have little historical foundation. The list of the King of the Picts include other historical figures reigning in parallel with the Dalriada kings in other areas of what is now Scotland. The critical essay 1729 of Innes, which I'll be reading, while demolishing the king list, is going back to Bose, substituted in parts kings of the Picts, and is now regarded as questionable in its own way. Innes was a Jacobite and concerned, therefore, to lay emphasis on legitimacy of descent and primogeniture. So guys, sorry it's getting a bit late, my throat's getting a bit croaky. But this is we've seen this list again, we've seen it in the Douglas site. But all the list of kings going back 330 BC. It's funny how it's 330 BC. There's that special number, 33, 330 BC. When really, in reality, we can only go back to as far back as Kenneth MacAlpin, and as that King of Scots, Picts. It might be him King of Picts, but we've not got much evidence because the Picts never left any written evidence. They're still a very mysterious race of people. But this is just more, like I said, I'm practically just skimming it now. And this is what I was talking about, the land of Scotland and the common good, is a report. I'll just read the first few paragraphs. A central issue in the long-standing calls for land and reform in Scotland continues to be the very concentrated pattern of private land ownership in rural Scotland, with a relatively small number of landowners with large properties owning the majority of Scotland's land area. It is claimed that currently 432 private landowners own 50% of the private land in rural Scotland. So see these landowners, these go back to these families, these aristocracy that are out there, that own all this land. The latest estimate of Scotland's population is 5.3 million, so this means that half of a fundamental resource for the country is owned by 0.008% of the population. As a measure of inequality in a modern democracy, this is exceptional and is in need of explanation. This remarkable pattern of ownership leads Scotland to be described as having a more concentrated pattern of large-scale private land ownership than is found in any other country in the world. Scotland also has a similar type of international distinction in relation to feudal tenure. Up until the abolition of feudal tenure, etc. Scotland Act 2000, Scotland was the last country where feudal tenure was still the way most land was owned. And like I said, guys, this, it tells you all the figures. I've got charts here. So you've got the percentage of Scotland's land area. We've got 50% here. Just over 600 landowners. So we've got 30% of the land owned by 30% of the land is owned by under 200 landowners. 30% of the land. That's crazy. And Scottish people think they're free, and they wave that flag, that saltire, that papal saltire, St Andrew, and the lion rampant, who represents the Stewarts and the Bruces, these imposters. And I'm just kind of tired of the fanboys, especially the one that's following me around and now sending me emails. He needs to understand, he needs to read, he needs to take off his rose tinted glasses. So guys, I've got other things that I was looking at, but like I said, I've just got back to my computer. I've just recently got 1.7k subs, guys, so thanks very much for that. If you're new to the channel, thanks for joining. I'm not sure why you've came, if it's for the live streams, the hangouts, the walks. It's a mixed bunch over here, so I'm just glad to be back, guys. And anyway, hope you've enjoyed that wee rant against royal aristocracy and Scottish land ownership. And I hope you have a good day. See you later. Cheers.